اوكي بدنا نبدا الجلسه التاليه اللي هي عمليا جلسه مكمله.
We are going to start the second part, which is additional session. We're talking about realistic examples to return. We have three speakers. Nemi Ashlar from the Erkaref village, and Dr. Uri Davis and Dr. Selma Porobić. We're going to introduce them in a minute. The first speaker will be Mr. Nemi Ashlar, who is one of the displaced person from the village of Iqrit. He's the head of the association of the displaced, and he grew up like all the people from that village, the people who have a right that has to be returned. And since his childhood, he's been battling for that. He works in high-tech and computer systems, and he's going to talk to us about the battle of the Iqrit people for the return to their village, calling it community power at Iqrit, at the village rather. The lecture will be given in Arabic. Good evening. I'm here because Shadia, the coordinator of the organization, couldn't come because of death in the family.
Okay.
Truth be told, I don't have a presentation or slides. I'll just talk about our experience in the association of the Iqrit village and our battle and the special experience that we've had and the practical battle. I'm not going to talk a lot about the pain of the Nakba or the status of being a refugee. I want to take advantage of this opportunity to make a kind of discourse between me and the people in the audience, especially what is our way of doing things. This is a historical short survey. We were deported in November 48, 6 months after the establishment of the state. The displacement was in 2 stages. The first stage, they took all the women and children and the young people. And the second stage, when they took the men 3 months after the first deportation, and they transferred the men who remained in the village to Rame, to another village. And the forced displacement was a tragedy. And it started in that time. And since then, we've been struggling for return. The special thing about this village that was displaced or deported, our parents were taken 25 kilometers away from Iqrit. The status of refugee was that after a short time we asked to come back. And why did we ask to come back? Because one of the conditions for the deportation, or an agreement that was actually signed by us and them, that we're going to go out for 2 weeks. And because of there's all sorts of secret operations in the area, and they want to safeguard our health. It was such a basic thought, and we signed an agreement with the commander who occupied the village. And after we understood that we were displaced and we won't be able to come back because of the military government, they prevented us from coming back after the 2 weeks. 4 months later, we approached the Supreme Court, and we appealed, and we won in the Supreme Court, and the ruling of the court was the only one that we got in our benefit since the displacement until today. All the other rulings were against us, or with an attempt to do all sorts of evading the situation, or the after we, in June in 51, the government and the army demolished the village. 24th of December, on Christmas Eve, they destroyed the entire village except for the church and the cemetery. And since then, we've been battling for rebuilding Iqrit. Our battle was during the mandate. It was with meetings with the authorities. And the Israeli left wing, our supporters. At that time, there was no distinction who's left and who's right. Until the 70s, when the battle for Iqrit was led by Butrus Raya, the priest. And in August of that same year was the biggest demonstration with 5,000 people participating. We demonstrated in front of the Prime Minister's office, and there was a rally and a hunger strike. The priest met with Golda Meir, who was then Prime Minister, and then there was an attempt by the establishment to build and to organize a battle that will be continued. The most important thing in our battle that time was for education and training. All the people in our village, we were educated. We grew up knowing that there's a right that was taken away from us and we have to give it back. It's always in our mind. It's part of our awareness as citizens, as a community, from that day of displacement. And we feel that we are Iqrit people. Practically, our prayers are in the village. We bury our dead in Iqrit. It's the only place where we get the right of return, which is signed by the authorities. When you're dead, you have the right to be buried there. During the 80s, we had a period full of battles and struggles together with Israeli left. At the end of the 80s and then in the 90s, supporters came also from the right-wing parties in the government. Our issue came to its peak in 1995, when a committee of ministers, I'm just talking in a nutshell. You can go into our site, of course, to see everything. Just because you don't have time, I'm just doing it telegraphically, and I want to go to the main things. The issue, as I said, developed towards a legitimacy. We have a ministers' committee. We have a ruling of the Supreme Court of Law. We have public support. We are inside our village. We hold our ceremonies. Nobody stops us from doing it. Although in the last few years, there's a few problems with the land authority. And the most important thing, as I said, is the issue that we see social capital for us, and that is that all the people from the village participate in all the events and all the celebrations. We celebrate our holidays. We do the prayer. We get married there. All the people from Iqrit are Christians. And therefore, the public activity is always around the church. As I said, the Committee of Ministers was a very important point on how to continue our struggle. We derive from that our struggle in a legal point of view. We act on various levels, on the social level, the economical, the national, the legal, because I said we have a ruling of the Supreme Court and the Committee of Ministers, and that gives us strength. Actually, there was a period that Rabin was the prime minister, and we almost came to an agreement. There was a plan to return the people, to bring them back. We took the map. We saw exactly where the lands were. There was a compensation. There was a formula. And we felt that something is actually happening. And this thing typifies our story. And it's different to the others. We have something that actually happened in reality, something tangible, more than the others ever had. Unfortunately, when Sharon became prime minister, he refused to complete this project, and so this whole thing finished until the last 4 years, in which we decided to realize our return practically. A group of young people, 3 years ago, they went and lived in that village. We built 2 rooms close to the church. These 2 rooms have a kitchen. And of course, we built, they demolished. We built, they demolished 3 times. And now, today, we have a group of young people who is about 14 to 25 people that change shifts, but they make a presence in the village. It's open. It's known. And we have a great achievement that happened 4 years ago, and that is to bring electricity to the church, because actually, we're talking about a displaced village that has nothing, no building except for the church. And the closest electric point is in another Jewish settlement. And that was a legal battle that took us 11 years. And since then, for 11 years, we've been asking for electricity, but they wouldn't give it to us. We came to the district court and then to the Supreme Court again, and 3 judges decided to connect us to the electric grid. And it wasn't just a ruling, because what they did with us when they came to implement this decision, they said that if you make a ruling in the Supreme Court, it means nothing. Even the government resolution says nothing, because for months now we have electricity in the church, and that's a real proof to the legitimacy of our struggle, of our battle, and this is a proof to the fact that there's hope for a real return. Through this short survey, you can understand that we have it's a special case. It's a different case. And I'd like to summarize it with 4 or 5 points. 1, in our village, on the lands of our village, there's no Jewish settlement, no Jewish building. Means that there's no legitimate right of the government or any body to build on our lands. Then we have the ruling of the Supreme Court. The third thing is that we have recommendations by the Committee of the Ministers, and all the recommendations of those committees are in a level of government decisions, resolutions. Only in our case it is so. The very strong thing, more than these 3, is the solidarity of our community, the community of the village. We have a sort of system that is working, and immediately every baby when he's born, he knows that he is displaced from Iqrit. Even in the summer camp that we've been holding for 21 years for a whole week, we build tens or hundreds of tents in the village, and we remain there for a week. A week of battle and training, enhancing the awareness. It's a week in which we hold and maintain the fact that we are inhabitants of Iqrit from one generation to the other. We show the children and the youngsters the village with all its history and the stories and the events that took place at the time. And that's very important because we're proud of that. And this is what differentiates us from other displaced villages. The fourth thing which strengthens our connection to the land is the fact that we hold our ceremonies, or we celebrate in our village the Christmas holiday there. And now we're going to have Easter. We're going to celebrate that too. Namely, we live in refugee villages in the north. Most of the inhabitants are in the north, in Haifa, Kfar Yassif, or in other places, Rameh. But in every event, we meet there, whether it's a happy event or a sad one. And that's what differentiates this case of the struggle that we are holding and the continuity of our struggle. There are a few things that it's important to mention, and that is our organization, which is very important because we want to make a work plan. It is a very important one. We're working without any hesitations on all levels. And this thing we feel today because every 2 or 3 weeks we go to the Knesset, to the Israeli parliament, and we lobby. And the last Knesset, when it was headed by an MK from a Zionist party, Moshe Mizrahi, he was one of the salient MKs from the Labour Party, and we had no problem to meet all sorts of right-wing MKs, quite a few of them, Ofer Shelach and Mitzna. I'm not talking, of course, about the MKs who are Arabs or Meretz, and we met with Herzog, and all the members of Knesset who actually, we are now preparing the ground in order to form a lobby to support us when eventually we come to the moment of truth, namely that at the end of the day we believe that at this period that eventually our struggle has to be focusing on the level of the government. We still haven't gotten the power that can remove the occupier from our land. We're in a reality that we're holding our struggle within the reality without giving up or surrendering. Because of the shortness of time, let me say that in our work we were always initiators. We initiated a few things. For example, electricity. In order to get electricity today, we go in our plan. We want to get also registration of the land in the registering office. And this is going to happen because these things that eventually will bring back the return. For the last 4 years, we prepared a master plan for the return so that we decided to come with the actual plan. So we took a professor, an expert, and we made an master plan. And we tried through this plan to cooperate with institutions that are here in Israel, and with the Committee of the Displaced Person, and then we with the Organization for Human Rights. And unfortunately, these activities never led to or never ended the way that we were hoping. And we did it as a study. We want to learn and to be able to present our plan and to get feedback. We wanted to see where we made mistakes, where we succeeded. We're not afraid to admit mistakes that were made. If there's a mistake, we wanted to amend it. We couldn't actually collaborate, unfortunately, with these organizations because they work according to the will of the Swiss Foundation. According to the agenda of the Swiss Foundation, we consider ourselves independent. We are free. We are, and our interest as displaced, as members of a village that has different needs, or even at this point, which is a point which is different than the ones that the other villages are in. We think that had this experience been held in the right way, we could have come out with a result that allows everybody to work on his own project, and that there should be some sort of an umbrella above all these existing organizations, and not to feel that we are threatening anybody or anything like that. The most important point that I'd like to underscore is that the community we must preserve ourselves as a community. I think that's the most important achievement. If you come on a holiday, you'll see that 300-400 people come to a very small church. And that shows our uniqueness as opposed to the others. And I'd like to conclude here. If there's any questions, no, questions will be later on. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for the project.
Zochrot was a partner to the work on Iqrit. We have organized quite a few meetings, visits there, and we have issued a pamphlet on the history of the site. And of course, in many circumstances, we organize visits to Iqrit. Those who want to learn about the subject can follow our publications. You talked about for villages, and the historians agree about 534 villages from which people were expelled. You spoke about the cemetery for the people who returned dead to their village in Iqrit. Right now, there is a funeral of a man who is a member of the Iqrit organization. He is being buried today. And a few days ago, there was another funeral. And so we express our consolations. The next speaker is Dr. Uri Davis. He will be speaking in English. And we will introduce him in English.
Uri Davis. The title is From the Palestinian Jamassin Al-Gharbi to the Israeli Givat Amal Bet, or B. Critical reading of the historical taboo. Dr. Davis is an anti-Zionist of European Jewish descent, born in Jerusalem in 1943, citizen of Apartheid Israel. Dr. Uri Davis is member of the Revolutionary Council of the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, Fatah, and member of the Palestine National Council, PNC, erstwhile associate professor at Al-Quds University Institute of Area Studies, IAS, Israel Studies Program, Jerusalem, Abu Dis, Palestine. Co-founder of the Exeter-based Palestine Studies Trust and University Fellow in the College of Social Sciences and International Studies, Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies, European Center for Palestine Studies, University of Exeter, UK. Member of the Middle East Regional Committee of the International Journal Citizenship Studies, critical member of the Israeli and American Anthropological Associations, honorary member of the executive committees of the Kalandia Camps Charitable Association and the Mental Health Families and Friends Society, Ramallah, Palestine, and chairperson of the now latent Al-Bayt Association for the Defense of Human Rights in Israel. Dr. Uri Davis, تفضل.
One is privileged to comment on interventions of prior speakers, and some of the comments that were made I regard as relevant to my primary paper. So with the permission of the chairpersons, I will try and divide my time by half, more or less, and devote 10 minutes to outline my specific situation at this podium and to my paper. I was given a rather long introduction, and I want to focus on my membership in the Israeli Anthropological Association and American Anthropological Association, and on the word critical. I'm a student of the Department of Anthropology of the New School for Social Research, a student of the late Professor Stanley Diamond, the department as the forefront of critical anthropology, and what I have learnt there has informed my professional and political work over decades. So I will start my situation here and now at this podium. We all know that 93% of the territory of Israel proper is illegal land acquired by the political Zionist settler colonial invasion of Palestine, and in law, not just in practice, in law is dedicated for Jewish settlement alone, and Jewish should be put in quotes because under the Israeli law of return, the definition of who is a Jew differs significantly from the Orthodox religious definition. 93% in law for Jews only. I am recently arrived from South Africa, where I was invited as one of the main speakers on Israel Apartheid Week in South Africa, and I can compare 87% of the territory of South Africa in the years and decades of apartheid were devoted in law for whites only, 13% for people defined in law as non-whites, 93% in Israel proper in law for Jews only, and about 7% for the apartheid divide between Jew and non-Jew. It's not in law between Jew and Arab, it's in law between Jew and non-Jew. So there isn't a square centimeter, with the exception of the 7% of this country, that doesn't stink under Zionist hegemony. And this place is no exception. But to my intuition, just as there are degrees in the Richter scale of earthquakes, there are degrees of stench. At the top of the so-called apartheid scale, I would point to the Israeli Knesset, the sovereign of apartheid Israel, and at the top of what I would call an apartheid stinking institution. And I wish in this connection to congratulate Zochrot, because they took a strategic decision similar to the strategic decision of the joint Arab list, where there is a crack, stick your foot in. And I subscribe to that decision. Where there is a crack, stick your foot in and say what you have to say until and if you're kicked out. But it still stinks. I have not as yet been invited to address audiences in the Knesset, but I have been invited to address audiences at this venue. And this venue, to my intuition, is grade number 9 of stench. This venue was directed by a criminal against humanity called Rechavam Ze'evi. This venue projects as images if the country of Palestine is the homeland of the occupier and not the homeland of the occupied, the homeland of the colonizer, not the homeland of the colonized. And I must admit that I deliberated quite a lot. What antidote can I bring to this podium in order to minimize the level of stench, at least insofar of my presentation? You know that I'm a member of the Palestine National Council, the representative of the Palestinian people worldwide, and a member of Fatah. So I brought an antidote, and I'm going to go behind the screen and put it on the podium, I hope with your permission. The other comment I'm able to do, oh, I have another 6 minutes. I am able to contribute in response to interventions made prior to mine, is highlight the utility of international law and highlight the fact that we, and in this we, I include myself and my own organization and my own various institutions into which I have an input, we have underutilized this avenue, and that is international law. The values of political Zionism, the values of apartheid Israel are incompatible with the values of democratic constitutions, and addressing relevant international fora in liberal democratic states is bound almost, I'm careful, almost bound, or very likely to end up with a defeat of Zionist apology and Zionist position and Zionist legality. Now, the problem with international law, as I understand it, is that one has standing before international legal fora only if after exhausting all levels of domestic law. And I wish to address myself to the previous speakers and to other people who intervened. There are instances where the colonized people of Palestine, the Palestinian Arab people, have exhausted all domestic fora, including the High Court, and one of them is the case of Iqrit and Birim. In the case of Birim, I'm not sure that it applies also to Iqrit. Until the last verdict, the Supreme Court justified Israeli government position or Israeli legal advisor position that the return of the refugees, internally displaced people, ethnically cleansed people of Birim and Iqrit is not possible for reasons of security. The last verdict that I'm aware of, and I stand to be corrected, and please correct me, is departure from false security allegations, which, you know, with great difficulty international legal experts may accept, into straight political arguments. This is a precedent, and in the framework, temporal framework, where the government of the State of Israel is negotiating with the PLO a permanent settlement, a permanent status agreement, that precedent could somehow damage, dent, impeach, weaken Israeli position on the question of right of return of Palestine refugees. Now take this to international fora. I would be very surprised if the people of Birim and Iqrit will not win flats down. And again, I'm perplexed that nothing was done in this direction, and maybe my comment and this conference would encourage people to address international law. They are not Mickey Mouse legal status. It is much easier to intimidate or bribe a politician. The frame of reference of a politician is the next elections. It is not that easier to intimidate or bribe an international justice. The frame of an international justice, or any justice for that matter, is the law. And of course, the Israeli Supreme Court, the law being an apartheid law, cannot diverge very much from the legislation of the Knesset. When structuring my paper, I decided to follow key questions put by the organizers of the conference to participants, suggesting that they may focus on these questions, and took as point of departure, thank you. Well, I didn't know that I was that good in timing myself. I'm primarily university teachers, and university teachers tend to make long presentations and very detailed and footnoted. I took as point of departure the case of Givat Amal Bet and the ethnically cleansed people of Jamassin al-Gharbi, because as some of you may have had the occasion to follow, and I have images of the protest, where is justice? Arison and Tshuva are liars or Ramaim, but I can't think of the English term. And what other banners are there here? Mapai Natna Admot Medina Tzedek Chevrati Yachzir. Mapai, the ruling party at the time when the Arab Jews of Muslim and Arab countries were moved over to the lands of ethnically cleansed Jamassin al-Gharbi, Mapai, the ruling party, gave them state land, and social justice will return the lands to the people now removed from the territory of Jamassin al-Gharbi, Givat Amal Bet, and the territory has been handed to property developers. Now, of course, there is an elephant in the room, and that is the ethnically cleansed people of Jamassin al-Gharbi. They are now refugees in various refugee camps in the West Bank and beyond. But the people demanding justice of Givat Amal Bet fail to address their presence. And the question of return and the right of Palestine return is intimately related to a question that has been recurring as far as I could see. I'm sorry I missed the first day. I returned the day before from South Africa and was not able to attend the previous day. But the question that is inherent to this subject is, what do you say to the Arab Jews who were pushed out of the area where they were placed by the government and are now having to seek alternative accommodation, either better or worse, but probably not Jabalia refugee camp or any other living conditions under which Palestinian 1948 refugees and their families have been reduced to reduced over the past sort of 7 decades. Now again, I refer to international law because, of course, one common Zionist argument is that you do not correct an injustice by perpetrating another injustice. And international law addresses this question For instance, the final report of the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations Organization, Paulo Sergio Pinheiro, submitted a report to the Commission of Human Rights and the Subcommission of the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights in the early 2000s. And I won't read even not the section that I quoted, save perhaps two sub-clauses. States should ensure that safeguard and due process extended to secondary occupants do not prejudice the rights of legitimate owners, tenants and other right holders to repossess the housing, land and property in question in a just and timely manner. States should, in cases where eviction of secondary occupants, that's the Arab Jews of Givat Amal Bet, are justifiable and unavoidable. The states should, in cases where eviction of secondary occupants evictions are justifiable and unavoidable, take positive measures to protect those who do not have means to access any other adequate housing other than that which they are currently occupying, protect them from homelessness and other violations of their right to adequate housing. So appeal to, for instance, the Special Rapporteur's final report could provide a measure of defense and support to secondary inhabitants, including many of us who have properties in Tel Aviv or in one of the new towers like the U Towers and related towers on the land of Jamassin, Al-Gharbi. So that is my point of departure. The question that follows is the implication of return for Zionist ideology and practice. The implication of return, to my reading, for Zionist ideology and practice is the collapse of apartheid Israel, similar to the collapse of apartheid South Africa, and here international BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions, has a hugely important role to play, peaceful and focused, and I believe again will contribute to a similar consequence in Palestine as the anti-apartheid over decades. It takes decades to do, not months and not years, decades, brought down apartheid South Africa. Another question that I chose to address is how return will occur in practice and how it can offer an opportunity of living together in a truly democratic, egalitarian and just regime for all inhabitants of the country, and how will a joint space look like in terms of nationality, and how will identities be shaped by return. My paper is available in hard copy actually in color printed hard copy, so you can have a good glimpse of the images, and a copy of which will go to the organizer, and a PDF file which they may or may not choose to circulate. So I'll just focus on the core of a nutshell of my answer. The nutshell of my answer is that no imagination, proper imagination in respect of implementation of an answer to this question can take place prior to the defeat of settler colonial Zionism, prior to the defeat of apartheid Israel. It is only after the defeat of political Zionism in Palestine and with the nullification of Israeli apartheid legislation and its replacement with a democratic constitution guarantee equality of individual and collective rights to all, the implementation of the right of return of all 1948 families and descendants, Laji'in and Nazihin and Muhajirin, to return and possession of the right to the titles to their property. And I emphasize titles because in most cases the homes and the farms have been leveled ground, but the land is there and the titles are there. And the titles are not held by the settler colonial invaders. The titles are held by the Jewish National Fund, about 15%, and by the state, another 75%, more or less. Don't catch me by the percentage, please. And the transfer of title is an easy computer transaction and taboo transaction. Thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of Palestinian families have their taboo papers, but they won't be transferred to the legal owners unless the regime collapses, or to be very more specific, unless the core of Israeli apartheid is removed. And the core are the Zionist legislation, the Knesset legislation on the status of the World Zionist Organization, the Knesset legislation on the status of the Jewish National Fund, the Knesset legislation on the status of the Jewish Agency. All this has to be removed. The covenant between the Jewish National Fund and the state in respect of veiling Israeli apartheid by the afforestation and the recreational project, all that has to be removed, in which case the titles could be returned to all title holders. And what will happen to the present inhabitants? My personal suggestion, I'm not speaking for the Palestine National Council, I'm not speaking for the Fatah or the PLO, I'm a peace center. If the current settler families become tenants and pay rent until their 49-year contract leasehold expires, well, I would consider that a humanitarian first step rather than replacing injustice with injustice.
Okay.
As to identities, again, my presentation, 1 minute, 2 minutes?
Please.
1 minute. Well, I'll go through half of my paper. My presentation suggests one Palestine state, federal, in respecting international legitimacy, all UN resolution, all, not only 194, right of return, but also 181, partition of Palestine into 3 segments. But that also means that Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel. And the borders are not the armistice lines, but the 1947 borders. But the constitution is one and Palestinian, the citizenship is one and Palestinian, the currency is one and Palestinian, sovereignty is one and Palestinian, property, one and Palestinian, and there are 3 language groups. A family where the family at home is Arabic is the Arabic language group, the family where the language at home is Hebrew, it's a Hebrew language group, and there is an official English language group corresponding to the fact that the city of Jerusalem is under UN administration. And with this, I believe my time is up. And you'll have to read the rest. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shukran.
I hope
you,
subsequent
Davis.
speakers would choose to keep this flag. If not, I donate it to Zochrot. Thanks.
Thank you. The third speaker, Dr. Selma Porobić. Dr. Porobić holds a double MD and PhD degree in migration studies from Lund University, Sweden, focused on forced migration, and is a founding director of UNHCR, initiated Center for Refugee and IDP Studies at the Faculty of Political Sciences, University of Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. She is currently project coordinator for the regional RPP, Freiburg University funded 2-year-long project employing 21 researchers on in investigating the psychological, right? Socio-social, actually, yeah, yes. Services for female forced migrants, and that's enough. Thank you very much.
Mobile phone? Is it right, Professor?
Fine.
It's yours.
You,
These
can,
days, the watch is there.
you don't want to donate that for Zochrot.
Oh,
Not one.
Hello again. Some of you have met me yesterday, so I said to Omar to skip the whole introduction, who I am. But I received a lot of questions since yesterday when I presented how rights-based return actually was realized for Bosnians and the true property repossession that went well. 99% of property that was confiscated, occupied during the war, when 60% of Bosnians were expelled, did go back to its rightful owners in this process of 10 years and now 20 years of peace implementation in Bosnia. So the questions I received were very much in direction, how is this, how can your experience now, and I talked about post-return realities yesterday, how can it be of use to our situation here? Because we are only at the level of conceptualizing return, thinking, imagining return. And I said, I was thinking through this very much yesterday. It is a different position that I come from and I talk about. It is a post-return reality. But if there is a message, and in what I shared with you from the experiences of returnees, yesterday in the 3 communities with successful return, although the context, as I told you, despite the property repossession, is rather negative. It's just the numbers of 1 million return tell us only about property repossession, not the actual return. It's much lesser. And even today, I will talk about the post-return, but I will go back and talk about the actual process of return to the lens, through the perspective of women. The ultimate message would be, and I was thinking about this yesterday, that despite the different positions, post-return reality that I'm sharing from the returnee's perspective through the research, and the current reality of where the return, rights-based return, is being conceptualized, is being just at the level of thinking about it and strategizing and how to implement it, is that it doesn't end with return. I'm sorry to say that, because from the position where we conceptualize it, strategize, and think about it, we tend to think once the return occurs, and we enable it to rights-based argument, and even write it in a peace treaty, like the case of Bosnia, and then at the level of state, make a strategy and implementation, policies and everything. It doesn't end there. You return, but the struggle goes on to remain in the places where you return, especially in positions where your return is not welcomed, as is the case in Bosnia. You become a minority in the places where you return. So the struggle to actually fight the structural discrimination goes on for returnees from the moment when they return. I mean, all the way through, fighting for return, actually going through the return process, and being a returnee up to today, I'm talking about 20 years in Bosnia's case, is a struggle, and it continues. So I will talk about specific struggle of a woman. Something happened with my computer, yeah. And one woman who can serve as a symbol of a women's perspective to realizing the return in Bosnia. The name of the woman is Sudat Mujagic, and there's a lot written about Emsa, is a short nickname for her. Because she was among the women, she comes from a small village, Kozarac, and this is not about that village, actually. It's about the women and women from that village who connected to other women, displaced women across the globe, and actually started fighting for peace immediately in the refugee camps in the neighboring countries, and she was placed in one of the camps in Croatia. This is 92 to 93. After the whole village was expelled, a lot of people put in concentration camps. Those notorious concentration camps that you heard about were in that location, Manjača, and all the other ones that you can read a lot about this little village, Kozarac, which also became a symbol for return in itself, because it is a positive example in a very negative, generally negative context of return, sustainable return to Bosnia. So I will tell you the story And it will be less academic, because I think it doesn't need to be so academic. If you want, you can read a lot about the woman, about the village. Many PhDs and books written about this, especially from the perspective of transitional justice, because this is where these returnees are right now. They're fighting their way to access their basic human rights and socioeconomic rights, like right to work, right to educate their children, etc. It's not at all that you return and all is flowers and working. It's just, it only starts there, the way into the society and becoming a citizen that can access all these rights as all others, in the case of minority returns, of course. So I'm going to read a couple of things from the camp, from '93 actually, from her diary. But before that, and the things that I'm going to read about are how they started thinking about being peace activists actually is a key to return. So, but before that, in one of the interviews with her, she said like this: "It is a woman on all sides who lose the most in war. Rights for which women have fought and won during time of peace disappear in a war. Your daughters, your property, your freedom, and even your own body can be taken during war by men with guns." It's very different how men perceive of peace and war. They oftentimes, I think, identify with themselves, she said. When you identify only with yourself, the suffering of others is meaningless. Women's identity, however, is usually with their family and their community. When you identify with others, you can easily understand the pain caused to others through war or domination. She started thinking about and organizing in the refugee camp with other women, Croatian women who were expelled from their own homes. They came together and they contacted women across the world and initiated an organization that is called Through Heart to Peace. This organization became crucial throughout the return process that started in the camp and spread throughout the camps, refugee camps, Bosnian refugee camps, but also Croatian refugee camps in Croatia in the 90s. And then she took the organization with her, together with other women, when they actually started realizing the return, just after the peace agreement was signed, by often visiting Bosnia. This is how it started. They would go on a first visit, and this was very hard. They couldn't find anyone to support, not even the International Police Task Force that was there in place to help returnees after the peace agreement was reached, and the Special Annex 7 that I talked about yesterday, that actually guaranteed the right to return to displaced. It wasn't easy, because not even International Police Task Force would support in that early phase visits and going back home, because it was unsafe. And indeed, the first visits to her hometown were met by women and children there stoning the bus that they came in for a visit. And a lot of returnees in the early years were actually also, as I said yesterday, shot at. So it was not really, even though the whole legal apparatus was in place, and international bodies and in police to protect returnees, it wasn't easy to start returning. So the first thing they did, they managed to get into Bosnia from Croatia. They planted a tree. I have pictures of this, and I promised to Zochrot colleagues that I will make a folder with the pictures, because I didn't have time to do that before this presentation. They planted a tree as a symbol for peace, and then they went back. That was the first thing they did. Later on, this is how she said what they started doing in the refugee camp. Concrete things that also followed them all the way through when they returned to Bosnia. And upon return, of course, they became IDPs first, because they could not immediately return to their own village. So, but she said like this, this is 96 when she was interviewed, remembering the time in the camp and how they were preparing for return. She said, "We were working to prepare people psychologically for return. We held trauma counseling sessions and conflict resolution seminars twice monthly for 50 or so women. The purpose of this session was to confront reality. When people return home, there are hard questions. How will I live? I think this will be the hardest confrontation with reality. The truth is very difficult. There is still a large element of this experience that does not feel real. People, in a sense, think they are still dreaming. But then, when they finally return to Kozarac, they will really understand what happened to them. That their sons and husbands are not alive. That they will not reappear. We are preparing for economic projects to facilitate our return to Kozarac as well. We hope to continue in Kozarac what we have done here in the refugee camps. One program we are preparing is a mobile kitchen to help people eat in Kozarac. There are workmen who are restoring damaged homes, and they will buy food from us. Some of our people will be able to earn some money this way. Also, the kitchens will help the women who are working all day cleaning rubble from their houses. Maybe they don't even have a kitchen. These are women who still live in displaced area or nearby, and they come back to Kozarac by day to clean their homes and prepare their gardens. And then she goes on and on and on how they initiated activities in the refugee camp and activities which were economic, psychological, in any sense, to prepare the return, to prepare the people for return. So when they actually returned, and this was 97, they were not able to return to their home village, but they returned to the nearby town Sanski Most, which is about 20 kilometers from their hometown, from the village. And there they were displaced persons, of course. So they addressed different set of questions as displaced persons, different from those that they were addressing in a refugee camp. I remember she was telling me on a number of occasions when I had interviews with her as well, the first thing actually that they fought for, how it all started in the refugee camp, was that they fought for their dignity as women. The occasion that she always remembers that felt very hard to them was not really the missing members of a family. She lost 48 members of a family herself only. And not being, you know, all the losses that she endured. It was actually the humanitarian aid when they got clothes from women colleagues from the West who wanted to help in this way in the camp, and they got clothes, you know, like old clothes that, and when the women opened the packages, they felt completely shocked because. It was another kind of degrading treatment from those that they expected understanding from. Understanding never came. So, but they were depressed, she said, and this is just a small story among many stories. But then they realized that, okay, we need to work on having them understand us. And no one can do it for us but ourselves. So they actually, in a way, tore apart all the clothes and recreated the clothes that they would wear. And then they invited UNHCR and different international organizations, and then they made a fashion week with different refugee women wearing the clothes as they would wear them. And so they produced even a catalog saying, I don't know, Amina from this village wearing something that she got from England, but this is how she would wear it. And from that was to show that, you know, if you can take everything away from us, but not really dignity, that was their way of showing it. So ever since then, they never received clothes anymore in the camp, but the piles of textiles, so they could create whatever they needed for themselves, for children, for others. And she takes that story as, because it was the first experience of when they started thinking how they could go about resolving things or taking things into their own hands. Upon return, and it's a very long story, and I'm taking it, you know, I'm trying to make a short story out of it. Being an IDP was another moment, so the whole process of return in practice was a gradual process. So from the aspect of IDPs, they worked slowly on going and visiting more often the home village that they wanted to return to, and also for the burials, because there would be excavations and mass graves, and they would find the missing persons, and then the missing persons would be buried in the village. So there was a return of dead people, the relatives, and they were buried in the village. So They needed a religious person for the religious ceremony of burials, and they trained men to become imams, IDPs, in order to have imams burying and being present at the ceremony. Women were behind it because it would be very sensitive in any way to have men or male displaced and refugees going back to the village so early on. So what the next thing that they were doing was organizing conferences, peace conferences, which already started in a refugee camp, but they wanted to move the peace conference, building a peace, peace through heart. That was their idea. Yeah, what you are seeing is also the website of the organization, Through Heart to Peace, with some pictures of the destroyed village, and later on also how they rebuilt it and worked. And there is a whole gallery of these pictures, activities that they've done. I'm just mentioning few. The conference on peace was then implemented in nearby a town where they were displaced. And they invited a lot of people from their own village and youth, especially youth, young children, to participate, regardless of ethnicity. That was their main goal, to start talking about peace and building a peace together. Then they slowly moved back, and they did return eventually, few of them, first women with this organization. It was 97, and the first thing they did was also not just to rebuild, to work on rebuilding the houses, which was a long process. It took a while, but was also to continue with these peace conferences, to bring the peace. They brought, they created the venues where everyone would gather and discuss how peace is important for the rebuilding of the community and the whole society in itself. These conferences continued. The last one was 2014, as far as I remember. Now it's visited by, people from all over the world. A number of activities were initiated through this women organization. Also helped organize in other women NGOs in Bosnia, around 20 in different towns, but also male NGOs in a way, or mutual, but also, when I say male, organizing the civilian victims of war, men, which was very hard to think about in immediate post-war period. But these women, because they were perceived as less of a threat, let's speak so, and they could use what is called a crypto-matriarchic space of power, by some colleagues, to be a bit academic and boring. So they used the space, which was, because they were not perceived as a threat, a power threat, in the returnee village by those who had the power, which were men mainly, to actually found a number of important NGOs which addressed all possible issues in community that you can think about, and also helped rebuild the local school, equip the school. The projects of youth gathering are there, different kind of events that bring young people together through sports, through culture. So the list is very long, and they continue to work on this because the biggest stress, the biggest accent in their work today is on civilian victims of war, actually, and on building the community together transethnically. So the work never stops, the work never ends. And that is the message of the village, actually, and the women. Why I took a perspective of women, because in many ways, as I said, they were not perceived as a threat. If the activities that they've initiated were initiated by men in the immediate post-war period, I don't think they would have succeeded as much as these women have succeeded in restoring the whole community, because they were not perceived as threat. The whole process of return was enabled through the peace treaty and through a government strategy for implementation of the special annex of the peace treaty, which was entirely dedicated to displaced. But it would not have happened if there wasn't for a bottom-up process of these people, and I wanted to enhance the perspective of women playing an important role, if they did not take it into their own hands. This morning when I was listening, just to round up, Mr. Suleiman when he said we will return and we will, if it takes, if that is what it takes, we will build the tents on our in our villages, you know, to make our presence. That is exactly how the return process in reality happened, because despite the legal backup of the rights-based return and all the international organization being there in place to help, it did not start happening before the returnees themselves went to their villages, or it's usually villages, and it's a bit different how it went on in the urban areas. It's a different story actually, and build the tents next to their war-destroyed property or occupied property, and put on these tents the big signs, we want to see this Annex 7 in practice. So they actually showed the way to all the actors that there were, both international community, UN, NGOs, international ones, local ones, that just popped up as mushrooms, that kind of advocated the right for return and wanted to facilitate return. It wasn't really before the returnees themselves showed the way, this is how we want to do it, that it became reality. Okay, I will stop there.
Can you say
Thank you very much.
How long time they stayed in the tents before building up?
Sorry?
How long time they stayed in the tents before they built up?
Months, couple of months. It's different, but I know examples of returnees to Srebrenica, the first returnee tent settlements, as they call them, 4 to 5 months on average.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Thank you. Okay, we still have 15 minutes for questions. معنا 15 دقيقة للأسئلة والملاحظات. إذا في أسئلة بين الجمهور تفضلوا. حاليا.
Okay. From the audience, if you can, Nemi, can you add some information and some clarification about what you did in Iqrit and what happened there, and whether we would expect an end that is different than what we have reached? Well, the truth is the plan was our initiative. As an attempt, or one of the attempts that we made to try and provoke and promote and urge the authorities to implement the ministerial committee. The ministerial committee, without completing this plan, we came and did it by ourselves so that we can have something to negotiate over with those responsible, whether it was the government or the regional planning authorities, as we did with the electricity. The aim was to submit this ultimately to the planning authorities. Of course, the maps required in order to build this town, and the place where we would find an obstacle is this matter. What we were advised by human rights activists we are actually doing, it's on a back burner in certain activities that we are performing. The aim of this plan was to have some sort of learning of the concept, of the principle. We had a new idea, and we thought that the right headlines, the right titles for learning this should be together with the human rights committees and other committees that support return projects, as like the project for the return to displaced villages in Israel. Unfortunately, the attempt that began as a successful one ended up changing because key figures in various positions changed, and they made decisions that were not clear to us when we asked to have this in writing. As for the error and why, we don't know what is the point, what is the issue.
that you don't see that we're part of the consensus as they had interpreted it. And so this partnership actually broke up because this was perceived as problematic without being given any proper clarifications. As for us, this project is still a plan that we should have. I remember that in the negotiations we had with the government in 1994, 1995, we just happened to be in a place where we didn't know what a communal town was. We didn't know what it was, and we said at a certain point that we need to be prepared for any solution, for any proposal, some sort of perception, some sort of preliminary research, and not only to start discussing it during the meeting. And that was just an attempt to find out what we can find and what we can propose. Are there any other questions from the audience? Okay, so we will end just a few minutes early. Thank you very much. We will now take a break. The next session will begin at 4:30. See you at 4:30. Thank you all very much.